When I tell people I'm a game designer, I usually get one of two reactions: disgust or envy. Disgust, because despite the many excellent TED Talks that are out there that explain how games can better society, a lot of people still think that games are a waste of time at best or dangerous at worst. And envy, because there is this inexplicable assumption that making games is the same as playing games all day. I tell my students that's not true. So luckily, I didn't get that memo. When I entered the game scene in my late 20s, I had no idea what games or gaming were supposed to be. I thought, there are so many different kinds of books, and people read them for very different reasons. Why shouldn't the same be true for games? I didn't grow up playing games. One day, when I was 11, I brought home a Nintendo DS with Donkey Kong on it. And that day, I spent blissful hours jumping over obstacles, avoiding enemies, rescuing the princess, until my mom, who apparently had read the memo, said, "Honey, why don't you go read a book?" And so I did. And about 500 books later, I received a degree in literature from the University of Vienna in Austria, and then a few years after that, a PhD in linguistics and interactive systems. Language in media, in that broad sense that encompasses movies and books and music, had always been at the core of my interests. Because growing up in different countries, I was always the kid who spoke a different language, had a weird dialect or strange accent. And I realized early on how language could create a sense of connection and belonging, and how media had the capacity to extend and even transcend language to create these shared experience spaces. So when I was reintroduced to games, sometimes during my college career, by my then boyfriend, a decade after Donkey Kong, I was in shock. Because games have color now, and storylines and characters. And while I realized that mostly I just killed skeletons in those games, all I could see was opportunity to create yet another media language that we could use games to explore the human experience, just like really good books and movies do, but with games' unique potentials. So for the last 10 years, I experimented with how we can use metaphor to make games about emotions and that convey inner worlds. And I termed my own term for it. I called them deep games, because it was about making these deep insights into ourselves through gameplay. Now, what I didn't expect was that the process of designing games became much more meaningful to me than the final product. And speaking of envy, I realized that deep game design, designing games about the human experience, could make you a better lover, because it promotes connection across 3 different axes: connection to self, connection to system elements, and connection to others. And the feeling of connection is intimately coupled to the feeling of love. This connection traps us in a state of rigidity or chaos or a mixture of both. And through my explorations, I've come to see the integrative, connective power of game design over and over again. I've seen how game design can promote love. And I'm here today to share with you how exactly, starting with connection to self. So remember that boyfriend that got me back into games? Yeah, we were perfect for each other for all the wrong reasons. And we got stuck in a pretty destructive relationship for about 9 years. That is a long time of horror. And then when I finally got an opportunity to study and design games at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology as a postdoctoral researcher, I jumped at it because, yeah, awesome, but also because I thought of it as a way out. But clearly, I wasn't quite ready at that time. And so we struggled on for 3 more years, long distance. Him in Austria, I in Cambridge. It really sucked. And I spiraled into anxiety and depression. But being a game designer, I dealt with it by making games. And I thought, if I want to understand how we can make games about the human experience, I can just as well start with my own. So I set out to design a game about my own messed up love life. Happy times. Now, the problem about inner worlds is that they are intangible. They are really abstract. You cannot just look at an emotion like you look at a physical thing, like a stone, and say, oh, I see what you are. I know what happens when I throw you through a window. I understand your rules. I had no idea what the rules of my relationship were. So I had to figure that out to make a game about it. And I invented a tool to help me with that. And I called it Dialogue with my inner game designer. The inner game designer is a game-savvy higher self that uses the structural elements of games to guide self-exploration. It understands that games have goals. Capture the flag. That games have win states. Capture the flag. Hooray! It understands that games have conflict. The other team does not want you to capture the flag. And it understands that games can be lost. Other team got the flag, darn it. Now that might sound pretty mundane, but that's because Capture the Flag does not plumb the depths of the human heart. The game I was trying to design did. And so the dialogue with my inner game designer proved to be rather revealing. I understood that my goal was just to be happy again. My conflict was that I viewed the relationship as both the curse and the cure. The guy was charismatic and charming and emotionally wounded, and I love to help. And so I invested all of my energies into making him happy until I felt empty inside. And now I absurdly expected him to make me happy in return. And that was never gonna happen. So if I stayed, I wouldn't just lose a game, I would lose myself. It would completely consume me. So the only way to win this was to stop focusing outward, to take charge of my own happiness, and to cultivate my self-love. I called the game The Bridge. That's a screenshot. Because it was about creating a bridge to myself through game design, but also a bridge into a brighter future. That game, you don't have to play it. It didn't turn out great. But the process of designing it truly changed my life because it forced me to connect to myself, and it set me on a path to treat myself like a precious object. Trust me, that took a lot of practice. But I'm now happily married to an awesome guy. That's Misha. And we have a 2-year-old called Max. So that's good. And I realized that this game design stuff is actually really powerful. And it is not a profession. It is an attitude. It is a way to approach life's challenges. And I wondered whether what had worked for me might also work for others. And so I started to collaborate with mental health care professionals and people with lived experience of mental health issues, like Paula and Alice, whose story I'm going to share with you shortly. And we make games with each other. And we found 2 more ways in which game design can promote integration, connection, and make you a better lover. So that second aspect is about connection of system elements, system thinking. So this is Paula's story. Paula is in her 30s. She holds an administrative position. She has social anxiety. She does not care one bit about games. Yet we meet for a 1-hour game design session to see how game design can provide some perspective on her social anxiety. The session is witnessed by 5 creative arts therapists at Columbia College in Chicago. And we start by identifying Paula's goal. It's the season of Christmas parties, and she says, my goal is to at least not feel worse about myself at the end of the party than before going there. And the win state would be to make one meaningful connection with somebody. So we set up the play space. Hey, there is no coding. Yeah, that's another misconception. We take a piece of grid paper, a bunch of index cards. There's a table with finger food and drinks. There's a couch in a corner with a big fat cat. Apparently, that's very important to her. And there are groups of people standing around chatting. Now, obviously, to find that one person we can have a meaningful connection with, we have to go out and start talking to people. that introduces the conflict. Paula explains, I am a boring storyteller, I speak slowly, I have a bad memory, people will not want to pay attention to me. As game designer, you get to ask really dumb questions, and so I say, why is that a problem? And she says, well, it will make me feel like I'm not worth talking to. That's great, because we just identified the game's core resource, social value. In a game, a resource is something that if you run out, you lose. Yeah, Monopoly, if you run out of money, you're done for. In games about the human experience, these core resources tend to be psychological or interpersonal things. For Paula, it all revolves around social value, the feeling of being worth talking to. And we assign points to this feeling. We say 100 points means she feels really good about herself. She wins. Introducing that core resource changes everything because we stop looking at her social anxiety as a rigid state. And we start looking at it as a dynamic system. And in systems, everything is connected through rules. So now we can go and investigate how that resource comes into play across different Christmas party interactions. That's our social value meter. Yeah, that's what game designers do. So we start with 50 points. Paula gets credit for just going to the party. And then if she makes that one meaningful connection, whee, it would be an immediate win state. But that's not very likely that you meet your soulmate at the first occasion. So what happens if she fails to join an interesting conversation? Yep, that would be quite a hit, minus 15 points, but it is not game over yet. She's still in the race. What if she fails to join a boring conversation? Yeah, that is not so bad. It's minus 5 points. That's okay. You can recover a little bit of sitting on the couch with the cat. It's all good. What if she successfully joins a boring conversation? Woo, look at this. This is plus 15 points. So this seems to be a low stakes, low risk, high reward kind of scenario. Seek out people you find boring. The only surefire way for her to lose, to be drained of that resource, to feel like she's not worth talking to, is if she sits on the couch alone all night and chooses not to interact with anybody. Then it's game over. In 1 hour and 20 minutes, we did the math. So there are two main takeaways for Paula from this little exercise. A, there is more than one way to win. System thinking planted a seed of hope and optimism by putting things into perspective. And B, system thinking erases the boundaries between me and them. If you view yourself as part of a system, you are an element connected to a bigger whole, which means you have agency and responsibility within that system. Paula realizes she is not at the mercy of others who assign social value to her. She decides who she engages with, and it is her who assigns points to the outcomes of these interactions. That is a really empowering realization. So system thinking promotes connection, promotes healthier relationship, promotes love. So the last aspect I want to share with you is how game design can make you a better lover through promoting connection to others, through deep, non-judgmental listening. Alice is a dancer, and she's recovering from eating disorder. And unlike Paula, who met with me, co-designed a game with me for purposes of self-exploration, Alice is my subject matter expert. Our goal is to make a game about eating disorder so that other people who don't have it understand what it's like. And since I don't have an eating disorder, I don't know what I'm talking about, I need to pick her brain. We conduct in-depth interviews, well, I with her, and then I mine them for rules and metaphors. I sit down, I create a prototype, I have Alice play it, she takes it apart, I try again, and then after a few weeks of back and forth, and we call this an iterative loop, she finally thinks I got it. Oh, thank God she got it. We call the game perfection. It's a screenshot. Because eating disorder is not about food. It is about creating this perfect, sterile inner world that is devoid of threatening emotions. And all emotions are perceived as threatening because they point towards needs, the need to feel loved and accepted. And if those needs cannot be satisfied, Alice says it doesn't just hurt, it throws her entire existence into question. So she feels it's better not to have any needs at all. And I learned all of that from her because my only job as a game designer is to understand. And so I listen and I question the rules of her perceived reality no more than I will question the rules of gravity in the physical world. And I have this epiphany. If emotions really are such a threat, if they endanger your inner life like slugs consume a precious garden, and not eating is the only way to defend yourself from that consumption, wouldn't I do the same? Wouldn't you? Doesn't it at least make sense that there is a problem here you cannot just get over? Making games with others about their experiences requires you to suspend all of your own assumptions, values, and beliefs for the sake of truly understanding somebody else's perspective until that person says, these rules capture what it's like. I feel recognized. And that is also a much better basis for discussing, handling the issue than just brushing the experience aside and rushing towards, yeah, let's fix this. Validation is a fundamental element of strong human relationships. And we need that now more than ever, not just to make better games, but to make a better world. We need the ability to connect to ourselves, to self-reflect, to handle our own shit before we can meaningfully, deeply, empathically engage with those around us. We need to think in systems because everything is connected. We cannot just build walls and think that we'll solve any problems. And we need to listen, to accept that our realities are never an unfiltered truth. So let's just stop the judgment for a moment. Let's try to understand first. And when we created a shared experience space, walked in the shoes of the single parent or the rebellious teenager or the police officer or the immigrant, let's tinker with those system elements together and find win states together. I think game design is not a profession. It is a mindset, an attitude, an approach to personal and social problems that emphasizes relationship, integration, and connection. And the ability to connect fosters the ability to love. The world needs more love. So let's all be game designers because game designers are better lovers. Thank you.